Hello and welcome to this RMS Support Center Train the Trainer training. This Train the Trainer session is for RMS administrators. If you have any questions throughout today's session, please go ahead and type that question into the Q&A area or the chat area of this WebEx. We do have some RMS Support Center folks on standby ready to take care of those as they come in. We'll also be taking breaks throughout the presentation, so feel free to unmute when we do that and ask your questions then. The slides for this presentation can be found on our website, rms.usace.army.mil. That link is available on the references slide in this presentation, along with some other helpful links like for our YouTube channel, our JIRA service desk, and the KM portal. Okay, so here we just have some preliminary guidance for how to take in this type of training. The Train the Trainer course is designed and intended for district administrators. There are no prerequisites for this course, but attendees are expected to be very familiar with navigating RMS, entering data, and the knowledge of governing regulations as they relate to RMS. Attendees should expect to gain a deeper understanding of how RMS works, why RMS works the way it does, and gain insight on how to teach fellow RMS users, hence Train the Trainer. This training material can also be used as a resource for internal district training. So here's our agenda for the day. First, we're going to do a recap of some recent patch release updates, and we're also going to review the previous Train the Trainer topics that were covered in the last session. Then we'll move into the primary topics for this session, which is going to be a review of the finances for contracts in RMS, as well as placement schedule information as it relates to finances. So let's get started. First up is going to be our recap section. Again, we're going to be reviewing the recent patch release updates that have come out since the last Train the Trainer session. And we're also going to review the previous Train the Trainer session topics, which for last time is going to be contract groups, word templates, query definitions, the RMS asset store, and custom reports. Okay, first up for the recent patch release updates, we're going to start with patch 414. This is the addition of the variation review period field within contract setup. So with the lockdown of the submittal review days, due days in a transmittal, when users received variation transmittals, there was no effective way of updating or changing the review days to reflect the extra days given for variation. So to correct this, this field has been added to the contract setup module within the submittals/schedule tab. To set up the variation review period, you just enter into the contract setup module, go to this tab, and to the right of the contract resubmittal period, you'll see a section where you can enter the variation review period right here in days. When a number is entered into this field, it should be used to calculate the transmittal review due date if the variation checkbox is checked for at least one submittal item. Next, still in patch 414, is an update to the discount percent field within progress payments. This field was updated to allow users to enter whole numbers rather than the decimal value, which can then be converted into the desired percentage. So that text guidance shown here has been removed, and now it's a little more straightforward. So if you just want to enter 1%, whoops, we don't show the updated view, but this verbiage here and this verbiage here has been removed. So if you want to type in a value for 1%, you would just enter 1 here instead of 0.01. Next up is an update to the current CLINs module. So previously it was not very easy to see where the funding was linked for CLINs added or modified through a contract modification. So this module was updated to show the different funding for each iteration of the CLINs. To view this, you can go to the current CLINs module within the Finances tab. You can select a CLIN and then look at the bottom history portion, and you'll be able to double click on any of the changes made to this CLIN to see how the funding was set up for each change. Also, if you double click the CLIN from the top list, that is going to open the funding for the initial funding of the CLIN. So to see any subsequent funding changes, just use the list in the history box. This next update only impacts district and system milestones. The Always Add Event on New Contracts checkbox on the screen will remain checked and cannot be edited. Now, moving into patch 419, we had an update that was made for the map view. A new link was added here to send users to check for any news regarding RMS. This link currently sends users just directly to our website, where you can get the latest updates for upcoming trainings, planned outages, recently posted videos, etc., which is all going to be on our website. Okay, next we added a new ability to RMS for any user with full district administrator rights. This ability is going to allow district admins to send all the documents for a contract to PCF with the click of just one button. This feature was added to help district admins that were closing out contracts with multiple files that had not been properly sent to PCF. This could be due to a lot of things, but it may most commonly be due to maybe a stand-in user was working on a contract for only part of the contract. And if they don't normally work on items within a contract that requires accepting document packages, they may be reviewing the document packages but not accepting them, which would send them to PCF. So when stuff like that has happened and a contract needs to be closed out, the district admin can come in here, click that button, and it will get the documents ready to be transferred to PCF. Along with the addition of that button in the contract file module, the same type of feature was added to the district office menu with the Send Documents to PCF module. So if a district admin has multiple contracts to close out and those contracts may have unsent documents within them as well, they can go to this module within the district office and select multiple contracts to send the documents to PCF. So this column here will show the amount of unsent documents for each contract, and then the checkboxes over here can be used to select which ones you'd like to get the documents to PCF for. Next is an update to the import-export module. This ability was added to get the document packages from the applicable modules. You can now download the documents that are in all of the document packages for all of the modules as well. That's going to pull every single document that you can see in the contract file module for a contract. This ability has been added to both contractor and government modes in RMS. As you can see here, though, the contractors do have significantly fewer document packages to select from. To download the documents, you simply click on the boxes that describe what you want downloaded and then click on the Get Documents button. Another update to the import-export area of RMS is that we have disabled the ability to delete SDF files if the contractor has requested acceptance for the import into the system, or if the SDF file has been accepted and for import into the system. Those SF files cannot be deleted any longer. If the contractor requests an SDF file to be accepted for import, it cannot be deleted, and then once it has been accepted for import, again, it cannot be deleted. Okay, this next addition was added to the what was formerly known as the NAS SDEF module. It is now just the Network Analysis Schedule module. So there has been a report that's been available in RMS called the Activity Schedule Comparison Report, and that allows you to compare two SDEF schedules to each other and view that data within a report. This Compare Schedules button has been added to the SDEF Files screen so that you can view that information rather than in a report, just in a screen in RMS from this view. And if you'd like to get the full report, you can click on this Preview Full Report button, and that will give you the Activity Schedule Comparison Report. Next is an update to the QA/QC section in RMS. This is a new feature within the QC Daily Reports module. A new tile has been added here so that you can filter based on which reports have been accepted and transferred to PCF. Next, an update to submittals. This is the final update we'll cover for patch 419. There were a lot of updates in this patch. This is an update to the submittal grid edit view. As some of you may be familiar with, if you want to quickly make edits to multiple submittal items at a time, you can click on the grid edit view within the submittal register to be able to do that and edit a few parts of multiple items at one time in one screen. Now all of the fields from the submittal item edit view are available in this grid edit view to more quickly update submittal items. And this is the case in both government and contractor mode. Moving on, we'll look at the patch 431 update. Here we had a general update to document packages and files in RMS. All file types, aside from those listed here on this slide, this has also been added to our manual, are available for upload into RMS. Only these files listed here will be prohibited from being added to RMS, and instead the errors shown here on this slide will show if you attempt to add a prohibited file. Next is in addition to the contract personnel module, specifically the edit screen, the team member active checkbox has been added to signify whether or not this staff member is active on the contract or not. And these date started and date finished fields have been added to signify the dates that the contractor started and then completed their work on the contract, or the staff member, excuse me. Also, one staff member can now be assigned to multiple position titles within the contract personnel module. You can just add another contract personnel record for the same staff member, just with a different position title. Next, we have another update that I did sort of cover a little bit. This update has changed the contract file module view as well. This was updated to patch 431. Again, there are now two tabs available on the screen. The Contract Documents tab is the usual contract file module view that you're used to, and the new File Viewer tab shows all the files in the contract, and they'll be listed here with different column filters. I do want to mention that to export documents from this view, you'll need to make selections over here on the left-hand side. You can either select all or just make individual selections, and then you'll want to click on the Export Selected Items button. This other export button over here is only going to export this data grid as it's shown, not the individual documents themselves. Next is an update to the P2 project module. This view has been updated to include these fields instead of the RMS issue field. These fields will come directly from P2, and they seemed a little more relevant here in this view rather than the RMS issues. There was also an update to the CUI options in contract setup. in this patch. When the check here to change the default COI markings checkbox is checked here, there's going to be a minimum requirement of 3 characters in that text box for editing the security markings. These prompts here will show if that limitation has not been met. And this update is also in relation to the CUI markings for summary reports. The same thing goes here. If you are entering CUI markings into that text box, a minimum of 3 characters is going to be required. Okay, now this update was made to the progress payment selection view. If there is a contract settlement date that is entered in CFMs, then the final payment due date is based off of that date. So previously, RMS couldn't display this date inside progress payments, but RMS was still using that date to calculate the final payment due date if it was available in CFMs. If there is no contract settlement date entered in CFMs, then the due date is just based off of the invoice receipt date. But when there is a contract settlement date, this date will show for the final payment in the payment status section on this screen. Okay, also in progress payments, the Send Payment to CFMs button has been moved from the Obligations tab to the Document Package tab. Hopefully this allows this process of creating and completing an invoice to become a little bit more streamlined. This button will only become active after the ENG 93 completed checkbox is checked under the Obligations tab. That is not a one and done either. If you need to make updates to the payment, and those updates need to be in the ENG 93, you can just uncheck the ENG 93 completed checkbox, make your adjustments, and then recheck it, and the Send Payment to CFMs button will be active. There were also a few changes and fixes for the Contract Changes module in this patch. First, we have a new tab that's been added to the Change Request Edit View tab. This is the Potential Design Deficiency tab. Previously, there wasn't any place in RMS where these sections on the BCD could be edited or filled in. So to fix that, we've added this tab. Due to FAR clause requirements, this is added to allow users to add the AE liability information. If a contract change modification is due to an AE liability, then that information can be entered in this tab and it will be displayed on the BCD report. For each of these questions listed on the screen, if yes is selected, then the memo text boxes will enable for further information to be added. If you need any more information on filling this out, please check out that FAR clause referenced in the guidance text provided within the RMS screen here. If no is selected on any of these questions, which is going to be the default, by default, all of these are going to have the no radio button selected, then these memo boxes will not be displayed. Those are only going to show up if you click the yes radio button. Also in Change Request, in the Status Funding tab, the optional selection to set the fund status and the Create BCD button have both been added here. The contract change workflow has been updated to include the fund status option and creating a BCD, which is committed to the Supporting Documents tab. Once all the information is entered in these tabs for the change, this button will create the BCD report and add it to that Supporting Documents tab. If a BCD has already been created for this change, then the button will reflect that by displaying Create BCD version 2, 3, and so on. Whichever version is being created, RMS is going to reflect that in this button. Okay, still in change requests, this is an update for multi-part change requests. A checkbox has been added, and this allows the first part of a multi-part change request to be converted to a single part change request. So let's say you just accidentally clicked, or you originally intended for a multi-part change request to be created, but it turns out it is really just a single part. You can check that checkbox to convert it to a single part change. This checkbox is only going to be available for multi-part change requests that only contain the first part, and that's the only part that exists. After you select this checkbox and then leave the screen, upon re-entering the screen, that checkbox will disappear. Okay, moving on, we'll review the topics presented in the previous Train the Trainer session. So first up, we reviewed contract groups and how to use them in reports. That was the common theme of the last session, was how to use things in custom reports and reports. Also reviewed were Word templates, which can be found in the district library. These are created, as the name states, in Microsoft Word, and they're typically used to generate correspondence and other contract-related documents. We also looked at query definitions in RMS. This allows you to create custom aggregate queries at the district level. However, even though the query is created at the district level, you can still add constraints so that the data can be filtered down at the contract level. This area does require a combined knowledge of SQL and the RMS table or data structures. To find out what the RMS table or data structure is, you can go to the summary report and open the RMS data dictionary report for reference. That's going to list all of that stuff in there for you. We also reviewed the RMS assets module within the system library. So all administrator users use a slide with the appropriate access can access this store. In the store, you'll be presented with a big list of items that you can select from. It's all shared. Use a slide. They're separated into the groups shown at in the tiles at the top. So contract groups, custom queries, templates, standard text, user roles, and report templates. You can select any item here and copy it into your district. And alternatively, you can also use this asset store to share your district reports, queries, or other options with other districts as well. You can do that by selecting the Add button, and it will give you a list of which item you'd like to add, and the screens after that will respond accordingly as well. Like I mentioned, custom reports were the primary topic for the last session. So we reviewed where to find these in RMS, how to create them, and we also took a demo through the Telerik Report Designer. Custom reports can be accessed in the district library if you don't want to create one. And they're also a great way to get data into a report format that's not already predefined by RMS. As a reminder, custom reports can be made available to either government, contractor, or both, and they can also be found in either the summary reports module in the district or within the contract reports module in a contract. There are two ways to create custom reports, basing the report off of a custom query or by copying the pre-existing report to modify for your use. So when creating the query or the report, there's a couple of ways to find the field and table names needed to add data. The first is, like I said, that RMS data dictionary report that I mentioned previously, and that's going to be found in the district summary report module. And second, you can also use the field information overlay within RMS screens as you wish to get the names of fields, the names of tables, and you'll do that by holding the control key and right-clicking on your mouse, and that field information overlay will appear. Okay, so that concludes the recap of our previous session. We do have a video on YouTube of our previous Train the Trainer session, plus the brown bag videos for those patch releases are also available on our YouTube channel. Like I said, we did just have a brown bag as well, but that YouTube video has not been posted yet. It should be within the next few days. So links to those videos can be found on the references slide of this presentation. Here is a list of the items that we'll be covering in today's training. First up is going to be financial administration for contracts. So we're going to review where funding setup stuff can be set up within the administration tabs. Next, we'll review everything in the finances tab, so contract finances, CLINs, pay activities, progress payment, changes and modifications, and finally the claims and disputes module. And then after that, finally, we will review the placement schedule module. Okay, first up is the administration tab as it relates to financial matters in RMS. So just a quick reminder, access to these modules needs to be set up in the user's assigned user role, and that can be found in the administration section of the user role, found in the contract user role module within the district office menu. Okay, starting up with the contract description module. So if a contract is going to use CFMs, the first thing that needs to be entered into the contract is the contract number and the contract delivery order number. And this needs to be entered as it appears in CFMs. That includes any dashes, spaces, or any other characters. If the contract number and the delivery order number combination does not match what is in CFMs and a CFMs download is attempted, a message is going to come up stating that no obligations were found. So make sure that these numbers match exactly what is in CFMs before attempting to do a CFMs download. This will also happen if the CFMs database chosen in contract setup is pointing to the wrong CFMs database, which we will discuss next. So moving on to contract setup, there are two places that impact finances on the administration/funding tab. The first is going to be the use CFMs for downloading finances and uploading checkbox. This is paired with the CFMs database name option. If the contract is not going to use CFMs, you can simply uncheck this box. If the contract is using CFMs, make sure that the database matches the name of the CFMs database where you'll be pulling your financial data from. By default, RMS is going to choose the district the contract is created in as the CFMs database. This means you may only need to update this if your contract CFMs database is different than your RMS contract database. The second place that impacts the finances in this area is under the funding section of this view right here, which we'll discuss in detail in this slide. In this section, there are three options to set up and track funding within RMS. The first and default option is going to be the track funding at the funding account level. This option gives you the most control, but requires the most initial data entry of all of the options, since it requires users to maintain each funding account. This is also the most used option, since it assists field users by allowing them to complete a payment without the user needing to know the details of how the funding is set up in CFMs, or which obligation is from which PRNC, or which funding account comes from where, and how that's linked to the RMS CLINs. The second option is the track funding at project level. This option will compute obligation amounts for payment based on available funds at the time of payment. Basically, RMS will treat any separate funding accounts as just one and will prorate payments based on the amount being requested with the amount of funds available. The last option is the track funding at project level - manually enter obligation amounts for payment option. With this option, users who are completing payments will be required to enter obligation amounts manually for each payment, and will therefore need to have a full extensive knowledge and understanding of how the funds are set up within CFUMS for the contract. Please note that if either of the options for tracking funding at the project level is used, there are slight changes to some of the views and how things are done in some areas of RMS. For example, the Contract Finances module will now have a Project Funding tab, which is where the contract award amount will be entered instead of on the Contract Funding tab, as with the pre-planned funding method. Note that the award obligations are still entered on the Contract Funding tab. Another change is to the funding edit view for both an award and a modification CLIN. If users have an extra checkbox, now users will have an extra checkbox asking if they'd like to pre-plan the obligation. Therefore, it's not recommended to use project level funding unless this is required. Once funding has been set and the payments are processed, do not alter the funding method chosen on this view. This could result in some data loss. If you opt for changing the funding methods, you'll see a warning screen shown here on the bottom of the slide, letting you know about that. Okay. Still within contract setup, moving into the payment/modifications tab. The top part of this view will display the obligations and their terms used on payments as it's pulled from CFUMS if the contract is using CFUMS. So the payments section is going to allow users to determine if the contractor can enter additional earnings or force them to only request money for pay activities. Also forcing the prompt pay report to show all activities for a pay request. You can do that here regardless of if that activity had earnings during that period. Keep in mind that if the contract has a couple hundred activities, this may make any prompt pay report multiple pages long. In this section, you can also set the default payment method for calculating payments on invoices. If nothing is selected here, the payment method will be set to standard by default. Every invoice still allows users to update this setting within individual invoices themselves as well. And then finally, the bottom two sections allows the user to set default person or office and title information for each of the different fields for ACO and CO modifications, respectively, to pre-populate any modifications that will be added to the contract. As discussed on the previous slide, the default calculation method can be set in contract setup, but users are still allowed to change that method within individual pay requests or invoices.
Okay, so now we'll look at the finance options available within contract setup for a contract. So from the contract menu in the administration tab, we'll go to the contract setup module. And already in the first administration/funding tab, we can see that the CFUMS information are the first fields. So if your contract is using CFUMS for downloading finances and uploading, then you'll check this box. If not, you'll just deselect this checkbox. The CFUMS database name, this is going to show if you are in fact using CFUMS for downloading finances and uploading. This database is going to default to whichever RMS district you're in. If that is different from the CFUMS database for some reason, you can update that correctly here. The second area is going to be the funding section. This is where you can select the funding method and the currency type for the contract. This is going to be the most used option, and I think it's the default option as well. The track funding at funding account level option is going to be the most used one. This is going to allow users to complete a payment without those users needing to know the details of how the funding is set up in CFUMS. The second option is the track funding at project level, compute obligation amounts for payment based on available funds. This option is going to compute the obligation amounts at the time of payment. So basically RMS will treat any separate funding accounts as just one and will prorate payments based on the amount being requested with the amount of funds available. The third option here, track funding at project level, manually enter obligation amounts for payment. With this option, users who are completing payments will be required to enter the obligation amounts manually for each payment and will therefore need to have a pretty full and good understanding of how the funds are set up in CFUMS. If either of the project level options are selected, some views are going to look a little different. For example, the contract finances module will also have a project funding tab. We'll review that in the slides later. And that's where the contract award amount will be entered instead of on the contract funding tab, as with the pre-planned funding method. Once this funding method is set and the contract has begun, this could result in data loss, so we do recommend against updating this during the life of the contract. And then the currency type, this is just going to be a lookup window. If you'd like to update that, you can select the correct one from the currency type lookup. The next area that impacts finances within contract setup is going to be the payment/modifications tab. This top section, obligations for payment, is going to show the obligations and their terms for the contract as pulled from CFUMS. Next, this payments section, there are two checkboxes which will impact the progress payments. So the first one, this one is going to allow you to enter additional earnings which are not included in the activity earnings into progress payments. This next checkbox, include all activities on prompt payment document. This is going to include all the activities for the contract within each prompt payment document for each progress payment. Next is the default calculation method. This is going to be the default calculation method set for progress payments within the contract. If nothing is selected here, it looks like periodic calculation was already selected. However, if there is no selection made here for the contract will default to this standard calculation method instead of the periodic calculation, unless set otherwise. You can also set it as the standard calculation, but if you do not set it, it will default to the standard calculation method. That can also be updated within individual progress payments as well, and I'll review that after I review these next two sections. So the next two sections, the ACO and the CO modifications, this is where you can auto-populate the signature blocks for the administrative contracting officer and the contracting officer so that those can be used in modifications. Okay, so we'll go to a progress payment and show that you can change the default calculation method for each payment. So if we go back to the contract menu and go to the finances tab and then to the progress payment module. We've got a payment in progress already. And to show this, we'll go directly to the additional earnings tab, which is where you can make the calculation method selection if you want it to be different than what is already set for the contract. So the contract is set for periodic calculation, but if I click on this ellipses button, I can change it to standard calculation as well. This page also provides an in-depth definition for each method Essentially, the standard calculation is going to use the total to date values, and the periodic calculation is only going to use amounts for this period.
Okay, next, moving on from contract setup and into contract status. The contract status, specifically the status phase tab, has some statistical data that's pulled from finances and RMS. Here are the data for the cost time growth section. This is pulled from the current CLINs, contract modifications, contract changes, and the milestone schedule modules within the contract in RMS. This view gives a high-level bird's-eye view of current, upcoming, and potential changes. So there are three parts to this section down here. At the bottom of each section, there's a calculated date for the contract required completion based on modifications and or changes displayed, plus the current value of the milestone scheduled contract required completion scheduled date. Okay, so this first section, the current contract including completed mods, code 6 section, is going to show the current changes in the contract. It will display the dollar amounts and duration days for all awarded values, plus all the modifications that have been applied to the contract. It's also going to show the growth of the contract by taking the completed modification and determining how much the contract has increased since award. You can also see the changes based on, if the change is based on a controllable reason or not. The second table right there, the current contract including completed mods. Code 5 section is the upcoming changes to the contract. This displays the same information as the previous table there, but adds any modifications that have change requests attached, but the modification has not been completed yet. So this second one is going to show the potential impact that those modifications will have on the contract. And the last one over here, the proposed contract, including proposed changes. That's going to be the current contract information plus change requests that have not been added to a modification yet. For each section, you can determine which contract change will be used in the calculation by looking at the status code column of each of the contract changes in the selection view for contract changes. Any change with a 4 will go into the right section, any change with a 5 will go into the middle, and any change with a 6 will go on to the left. So entering into the review of the Finances tab, for users to have access to the Finances tab, a user must have a CAC login. Any user who logs in with an email account will not have access to the Finances module, regardless of the permissions granted. For users with CAC logins to see this module or see this tab, their user role must have either read or read and write access for the corresponding action of this user's role within RMS. User roles can be added, edited, or deleted from the District Office menu's Contract User Role module. It's going to require a District Admin Contract User Role option under the District Office checkbox to be checked. A lot of information regarding these user roles was reviewed in the second Train the Trainer session. So if you have any further questions about that, please check out that video. Should be referenced on the reference slide, but I'm not sure. Okay, so the Finances tab does have two views depending on which stage the contract is in. If the contract is in the future stage still, then the Finances will only display the future contract module. If the contract is in any other stage, like active, construction complete, final payment made, any of those, then the Finances tab will look like the top image here with all of the modules. We'll go over each of those modules in this section. Before we do, let's take a look at the future contract module. So if the contract is a future contract, then this module is going to be the only one available. Information such as the estimated amount for the contract and the probability of being awarded can be entered or edited here in this module. You can click the edit button, select the contract and click the edit button to make updates. If the contract has been linked to P2, then all the P2 projects will show in this module as well. If the contract is not linked to P2, then the title information in the contract title field are pulled from the contract description module. If no contract number has been entered in the contract description, then RMS will display the contract ID. The contract title will be the information that was entered in the contract title field within the same module, the contract description module. The estimated amount is an editable field for users to enter what they believe the contract amount will be awarded with. Under the program funding sections, you have the option to set the contract up for use with multiple program types. If the contract is going to be associated with multiple program types, then you can check this box here to add more lines for the program type. The list of program types can be viewed in the system library when users first log into their district. A district admin has the ability to turn off or on any any program type for the district. So if you have users who need a program type added, you can navigate to the system library to ensure that the checkbox to make that type visible to the district is checked. If applicable, the S&A rate can be set as well. If the contract is linked to P2, then all of the contract information will be pulled from the information that's entered into P2, including the estimated amount, which is not going to be editable for P2 linked contracts. That field will be read-only in RMS. So after the contract award actual date has been entered in the milestone schedule module, the contract will switch over to being an active contract, and this is going to allow users to see all the typical modules associated with the Finances tab. Okay, the first module in the Finances tab is the Contract Finances module. In this module, CFMS related data will display within the contract if a contract is linked to CFMS. To get the CFMS information the first time or manually at any time during the contract, users can perform a CFMS download. If any changes are made within CFMS, like the removal of obligations or funding accounts, then users can choose to do a CFMS cleanup as well to remove those options. We'll discuss both of those a little more in detail later. Users need to be granted at least read permissions for the CFMS Finances and Recompute Finances options within the user role assigned to them to view this module. To edit, like set award amounts or do a CFMS download or cleanup, they will need read and write permissions. So though it is recommended that users who need to work with financial matters on a contract only have read permissions unless they're trained on how the CFMS cleanup will actually work. Okay, first we'll discuss the CFMS cleanup option. So as shown on this slide, this is one of the actions in RMS that is recorded and logged in the database to provide accountability for performing this action. When a CFMS cleanup is performed, it will check the data that CFMS has sent to RMS based on the contract and delivery order numbers that were entered in the contract description module under the Administration tab. If there's any financial data within RMS that does not match what CFMS sent RMS for that specific contract number and delivery order number combination, then those items will be removed. This includes appropriations, funding accounts, PRNC line items, and obligation line items. What this means is that it's very important for users to confirm that the contract and delivery order numbers in RMS match exactly what is in CFMS. There have been times that numbers in CFMS have been updated, but weren't updated within RMS. There are good reasons for running a CFMS cleanup. If an obligation, funding account, or PRNC are removed from the contract within CFMS, you don't really want it to show in the contract any longer. The other option would be for users to use the CFMS download. This process will only bring in any new data that was entered into CFMS that day. This is because RMS does a nightly CFMS download to get any updates from CFMS and adds those updates to RMS. But like I said, if you want anything removed, you'll have to work with the CFMS cleanup option. Mostly users may want to do a CFMS download if a new obligation was added, and they need to get the CLIN and RMS linked to that obligation the same day instead of waiting until the next day, so that RMS can just do it for you. Now let's talk about the rest of this view. The CFMS Finances tab is going to show you all the information related to the contract funding within CFMS. To see all this information here, you can click on the Expand button. It's going to expand what you see here. And then you can click on an individual item to get the details of that item down here in the bottom portion of the view. It's going to depend on what you're selecting. So if you're selecting a funding account, the data shown in the bottom is going to change based on whatever you choose. So if you select funding account or an appropriation, obligation line item, or PRNC, the bottom view will change accordingly. So for example, in this screen above shown here, you see a field for the appropriation number. However, if you had clicked on an obligation line item, you would see an obligation number field here instead. The blue sort tiles at the top will help you change the view to see only the type of item based on the name and the sorting title. If your contract is linked to a CFMS account, then the CFMS funding accounts will automatically display here after the first CFMS download has been run. Once that's done, users will double-click on each funding account to set up the award amounts, which we'll see on the next slide. Users cannot delete the CFMS funding accounts or accounts that have been linked to CLINs within RMS. And as with the last view, in the bottom of this view, users can see a brief summary of the account based on the account that was selected. If your contract is set up to track funding at the funding account level, then this view will also show the award contract and current contract amounts for each funding account in the data grid here. Okay, here is the edit view for one of the funding accounts that we saw on the previous slide. As you can see, most of the values are not editable within RMS because that information comes from CFMS. Users can update the program type by choosing the options found in the program type lookup field. The list of program types, as I mentioned previously, can be set for the district by a district admin by navigating to the system library, then the program types module, and checking or unchecking the options that will display in this lookup field for all the contracts within the district. If the contract is linked to a P2 project, then that information will be shown here as well. If the P2 project happens to have multiple projects, then users can change which is displayed by selecting on the P2 project button. The most important field in this view is going to be the award contract field found in the financial information section of this view. Now, if your contract is set up to use either of the track funding at project level funding methods, if that's set up in contract setup, then this award field will not show up here. You'll need to update that field in the project funding tab, which we'll discuss later in a few slides. The award contract field holds the total award value of the contract for the funding account that is being edited. Usually this amount matches the award obligations seen on the right side when first entering the data. However, as modifications are completed, these amounts may not always match, since the obligation amounts may vary during the life of the contract. In the same location, users can also see the total paid to date amounts for this funding account and how much is left to still be used for future payments. For those contracts that are not linked to CFUMs, when the non-CFUMs funding account is opened for editing, this is the view that the users will see. In this case, users can edit the work item name as well as the obligations for payment. This tab only shows up if the funding method was set to the track funding at project level, or either manually or based on the available funds under contract setup. If either of these options are used, then this is where the award contract amount will be entered, regardless of a CFUMS or non-CFUMS funding account being used. The next tab in Contract Finances is the Funding Balances tab. This tab is the most useful tab for determining if CFUMS accounts were set up correctly. By selecting any of the funding accounts listed, the bottom portion is going to display a lot of data from both RMS and CFUMS. The top part of the section will display data related mostly to RMS values, but the total available for the contract data is pulled from CFUMS. The middle section has data that's pulled from CFUMS on the left side and the data from RMS on the right side. The data on the right is pulled from the change requests that have been linked to a modification, but those modifications have not been completed yet. The right section is really helpful in determining if CFUMS was set up correctly. It's going to tell users how much has been authorized in CFUMS for this account, if there are any PRNCs that are not linked to the contract number associated with this contract, and how much is currently available to process a payment. The bottom section shows what funds are available for this contract on the left, and the more change request information that has not been completed on the right. So left and right. Next is the Obligation Balances tab. This tab allows users to view more specific information for each of the obligations available for the contract. By selecting an option, whether it's an obligation or a funding account, you'll be able to see how much is currently available for that selection in the left side of the bottom section if a contract is set up for pre-planned obligations. Notice in this view, the left image does not have the current contract information, and that's because this contract was set up to manually set obligations. The right side of the bottom section will display information about the selected option through the last paid invoice. Okay, moving on. Once the contract finances have been set up, users can now start adding award CLINs to their contract. On the award CLINs list view, you can see the amounts, obligations, and the name of each award CLIN. In the bottom left, users can see the list of all the funding accounts with their associated amounts and obligations. In the bottom right, users will see the total amount for the contract plus the total amount of all CLINs and any variances that may exist. Please note that the only time a variance will exist is when all award CLINs have been added to this module. The award CLINs will only show the information that was entered at award and should not be edited after a contract has started. If any changes need to be made after the contract has started, it's best to go through a change request and modification process to update those CLINs. We will discuss that a little later in the presentation. So to add a new CLIN, you can click on the Add button, or you can double-click on an existing CLIN to view the award CLIN edit view. If a CLIN has been added inadvertently or incorrectly, it's best to first delete it by using the delete widget and then recreate it instead of trying to correct it. So when adding new CLINs, it is best to understand that within RMS, there are two types of CLINs that can be used. First option is a priced parent CLIN. It's generally recommended that priced parent CLINs are chosen for CLINs within RMS if there is any possibility that the obligation for that CLIN may be changed. That's because as a priced sub-CLIN, once an obligation has been chosen, it cannot be changed to a new obligation easily. You would either need to create a new CLIN or defund the original CLIN, or you could go through two modifications where the first defunds the CLIN and the second refunds the CLIN, either of which would be kind of problematic for tracking purposes, so it's best to follow that policy. Price parent CLINs are always going to have the 4 numeric digits, and price sub CLINs will have 4 numeric digits plus 2 alphanumeric characters at the end. So after users click the Add button to add a CLIN, they'll be prompted for which type of CLIN they wish to create. Again, it is easier to work with price parent CLINs. However, if your district policy dictates a sub-CLIN, then that is what you should use for sure. Click Next to enter the CLIN number and choose the unit of measure to be used with this CLIN. Lastly, you'll click Finish to continue creating your award CLIN. So here you'll be able to enter a description and dollar amounts for the CLIN. You can also change the unit of measure chosen in the previous view. Please note that if you've chosen a unit of measure that is an amount unit, then you will only have to enter the award amount field, as the quantity and the unit price units will not be available. If you choose a unit that is a quantity type value, you must enter the unit price and the quantity for the award amount to be calculated. Next, you'll need to check the box CLIN pricing completed, ready to fund checkbox to proceed with choosing the correct CFMS obligation to link to the CLIN. Once the funding button becomes available, click on it and choose the CFMS obligations linked to this RMS CLIN. Once that's completed, which we'll show in a moment, you'll see the funding accounts in the bottom left with their award amounts and the obligation amounts, including the associated work items for that funding account. The bottom right will show the CLIN amounts and the obligated amounts plus the variance between the two. Now, if your contract was set up to track funding at the project level, there's one extra checkbox that will display to the right of the funding completed checkbox. As you can see here in the image, this checkbox will also be needed to pre-plan obligations by entering the funding information, which we will discuss next. So for either a pre-planned or a planned contract, under the funding button, you'll have a list of all the funding accounts with their associated work items, PRNCs, and obligation line items. You can simply add money to the correct obligation line item, then click or tab off that value to ensure there's no variance between the CLIN amounts and the obligation amounts. And finally, you can click on Next and then the Finish buttons to complete the funding for the CLIN. Once all your award CLINs have been added and funded, your contract is now ready to have pay activities added to it. So this next module, before we get to pay activities, within the Finances tab is the Current CLINs module. This module is just going to show all of the CLINs and their current values based on both award CLINs and any modifications that have been made to the contract. At the bottom of this view, you can see a history for the CLIN, when it was created, and any changes made to it. We've also added a new sort of new feature to this module, which allows users to see the funding of a CLIN for each part of the CLIN's history. So users will be able to view the different funding at the different stages of the CLIN's history by double-clicking on each of the history items at the bottom. Or if they wish to see the creation of the CLIN, they can simply double-click on that CLIN, and that will open up the CLIN edit view. The funding view will also look very similar to the funding button found in the award CLINs edit view. All right, getting into pay activities. Pay activities can be added in two ways. Contractors can manually enter each pay activity, or they can import the activities and the activity schedule by using an SDEF import file. And now, if you were not at our brown bag the other day, you can also use P6 XML files. So P6, SDEF, and XML files can be imported into the contract. Either way, pay activities do have to be entered into the contract with the total amount matching their corresponding CLINs prior to any progress payments being started. So when users first open the Pay Activities module, the first tab that's shown is going to be the Activities tab. This view is going to display all the activities by activity ID, description, linked CLIN, and the amount of the activity. You can single-click on an activity to see a brief summary of that activity's linked CLIN here at the bottom. And there are two sort tiles up here to restrict your view based on what kind of CLIN activity you'd like to see. Please note that invalid CLINs happen when an activity is imported from an SDEF or now an XML file that has an activity linked to a non-existent CLIN. Okay, in the CLINs tab, there are three sort views for this view: all CLINs, balanced CLINs, and unbalanced CLINs. Clicking on any of these tiles is going to limit the list displayed below, as throughout RMS. Each CLIN in the list will display the CLIN's description, the number of activities linked to it, the CLIN amount, the sum of all activities linked to it, and whether or not there is a difference between the CLIN amount and the sum of activities. When a CLIN amount is different than the total activities linked to it, then the status column will display the word unbalanced in red text. By double-clicking on any CLIN in this list, you can see all the activities that have been linked to the CLIN. Now on the Contractors tab, a list of all the subcontractors labeled the contract full name column, preceded by the number of activities that sub is linked to, the responsibility code of the subset trade, and the amount subcontracted out to the subcontractor will be displayed here. Any subcontractor that isn't linked to activities will display the contractor name in red text as shown here. Again, there are sort tiles to limit the number of contracts to view in the list by the type listed in the sort tile. As with the CLINs tab, double-clicking on any of the subcontractors here will show you a list of all of the activities linked to that subcontractor. Notice on this slide that the first 4 entries have no activity count, trade set, or dollar amount. This can happen when mixing SDEF imports with manual entries of subcontractors. So just be aware of that. Next and finally, the Features tab in the Activities view. This tab displays all the features of work added to the contract, the number of activities linked to the feature, and the feature ID. Any features that are listed in red text are not linked to any activities. You can sort this view by all of the features, linked features, or unlinked features. As with the CLINs and Contractors tab, double-clicking on any of these features here, again, is going to show you the list of all activities linked to that feature. Okay, when adding or editing an activity manually, this is a similar view to what you'll see. There are 3 tabs to the right. Those are only for dredging contracts and will not be displayed in any other contracts, or the two things to the right. In the activity edit view, all contracts will show the same information as seen on the general information tab here, aside from the dredge waterway feature, which will only be displayed in dredging contracts. More information on this will be discussed later in this presentation. The focus for this slide is the difference between the quantity CLINs and the lump sum or amount CLINs. When you select a CLIN for an activity, the CLIN amounts will be displayed below it. But as you can see here on this slide, this view is for an activity that's linked to a CLIN, which is a quantity CLIN. So users are going to see both the quantity field and the amount field. And here is the view of an activity that is linked to a CLIN that is a dollar amount CLIN, like lump sum, job, each, etc. Okay, the 3 tabs here only show in a dredging contract if the contract is set up to use dredging. You'll see these tabs across the view showing general information before dredging survey, after dredging survey, and comments. So that is where the contractor can add the survey type, start and finish dates of the survey, the scheduled versus actual through dates for the survey, and the performance information like depth estimates, actuals, and quantity. The comments tab is where contractors can add any comments that need to be seen by the government. So even though the information presented in these next few slides is typically the responsibility of the contractor, it is good for the government to understand how this works so that they can help the contractors with any training or troubleshooting required. So when manually adding an activity to a contract, click on the Add button and enter the activity amount, or excuse me, the activity number, and click on OK. If an existing activity is being edited, you can simply double click on that to open this edit view. Once you're in the edit view, this view is where contractors can link an activity to a subcontractor, feature of work category, and CLIN. Links are made by clicking on the corresponding blue tile, which brings up a lookup field for that item and then making a selection. Each item's lookup field is going to pull from information entered elsewhere within the contract. For example, the subcontractor will pull from the subcontractors added in the subcontractors module. Contractors are also going to enter the description, duration, phase, area, and the dollar amount for the activity. For the dredging waterway feature to be used, a dredging waterway must be set up in the district library with one or more features added to it. That waterway can then be linked to this contract via contract setup in the dredging tab and in the waterway system lookup field. For progress payment purposes, the only items that must be entered are the activity amount and the link to the CLIN. Other fields are entered at the discretion of the district, office, or contract policy. So there are times when activities do need to be deleted. When this happens, there are a few options to choose from. First, they can just delete a single activity as shown here by selecting and clicking on the delete button, clicking delete record, and following the prompt to confirm deletion. Or selected activities can be deleted at one time, and you'll do this by enabling the multiple delete option, selecting the desired activities, and then choosing to delete those selected activities. And lastly, they can delete all activities. Only use this under extreme circumstances or when an SDEF file is being used. There is no undo button for completing any of these deletions, so please make sure you are proceeding with any deletion of activities with extreme caution. All right, moving into the progress payment module. So progress payments, as I'm sure you're familiar with, are used for processing contract payment requests. To balance a progress payment, there are several things that need to be considered. First of all of the RMS finances must line up from the funding accounts, obligations, CLINs, down to the activities. Also, the obligations do need to have enough funds to pay the invoice. All the CLINs need to have obligation funding. The sum of the current contractor activities must total up to the current contract amount of all the CLINs. And within the progress payment, the sum of the activity amounts must total up to the CLIN amount. Next, the prerequisites to process a progress payment. You're going to need an actual NTP date entered, balanced pay activities, an updated SDEF import, and a completed contractor invoice. If the contractor schedule is set up for network analysis schedule on the government side and contract setup, the progress payment module will allow the contractor to import the pay request via an SDEF or, as I mentioned earlier, now an XML import. So initially, the progress payment selection view is going to show the pay period dates, the date the previous payment was approved in CFMs, the earnings today and earnings as period values, any deductions or refunds and/or refunds, the amount due to the contractor, and the origin of the invoice, whether it comes from CFMs or from RMS. So as mentioned in the recap earlier, a new addition, sort of new, has been added to RMS that helps users understand the payment due date calculation for final payments. So users are now going to see a new field when selecting a final payment for the CFMs entered contract settlement date. This is because any final payment that has a settlement date entered in CFMs will have that due date calculated based on the CFMs entered contract settlement date. This field will only show when there are no progress payments or for the final progress payment only. To open a progress payment, just double click on it. Payment is going to open in view only mode if it is not the current invoice or if another user is already working in that current invoice. Upon opening the progress payment, users can see a few helpful widgets in the upper right corner of the view. The first one is going to be the logs widget. This is going to display the list of all logs, all CFMS logs for the contract. Logs occur when a payment is sent to CFMS. So you can click on one to see the details of that send payment to CFMS action. And we'll get a little bit more into that later. The progress payments are locked down to only allow one user to work on them at a time, and this is to avoid any conflicts with data entry. It would be kind of messy if multiple people were working in the same place at one time. So it is important that you look at the payee office as well to verify that this is the correct information. This information populates from the CFMS download. So in order to have the CFMS download bring in any new information, the contract number and delivery order numbers in the contract description module, again, must match what is in CFMS. We like to stress that a lot. Those numbers do need to match exactly. And also the correct CFMS database has to be chosen in the contract setup module. Okay, some common errors here. Not entering the pay period from and through dates, The payment invoice date cannot come before the pay period through or the invoice received date, or excuse me, the invoice received date must be the same or later than the payment invoice date. RMS is not going to complete the ENG 93 if there are any logic errors in any of these dates. Okay, this here is a view of what appears when pressing the payment priority button shown on the invoice tab, or change payment priority, excuse me. Normally this isn't changed unless the contract is set up using something other than pre-planned obligations for payment has been selected in the contract setup. So, but the option is available if required. Okay, users have the option to view the payment terms within the invoice. For a quick reference, whenever a contract will be paid. The image at the bottom of this slide is a view of the payment terms button. In this view, you can check the payment terms for each funding account based on the type of payment being processed. Please note that these terms are set up in CFOMs. As such, this information can only be changed in CFOMs as well and updated here with a CFOMs download. The Return for Corrections button is also available so that the government can send a payment back to the contractor for corrections. When this occurs, the contractor will see a notice in the Progress Payment Selection view. All right, on this next Requested Activity Earnings tab of the Progress Payment, you have the option to review what the contractor is requesting within this invoice. You won't have the ability to edit this tab, but you can do that editing that you'd like to get done in the Allowed Activity Earnings tab. One common error here is that the contractor will enter the amount requested in this invoice instead of entering the total amount to date. When a contractor is entering how much they will bill for an activity, they need to add the amount they want from this invoice plus any previous amounts already received. Otherwise, contractors could end up with either less than what they wanted or negative amounts, which seems like they owe the government money. So, if you're not in agreement as the government with what the contractor is requesting, you can make the changes on the Allowed Activity Earnings tab. However, it is recommended that you just return the invoice for corrections and then have a discussion with the contractor about the amounts they are requesting, so that you can avoid altering the information on this tab. Yet again, please ensure that you are following the district policy as it relates to that, especially within this section. A common issue that's been affecting invoices are when CFOM sends RMS $0 invoices to balance the accounts in CFOMs. So when CFOMs does this, you'll need to go into any progress payment that is impacted, starting with the lowest number progress payment. Navigate to this tab, the Allowed Activity Earnings tab, and correct the earnings this period not matching CFOMs. You can see in the bottom left of this view a red message with a dollar amount that is different than the dollar amount in the total earnings this period box. You'll need to adjust the allowed amount column, allowed dollar amount column, to the previous amount for the all activities until the total earnings this period matches the dollar amount in the red message. Okay, the Subcontractor Earnings tab. The column header for the subcontractor earnings deducted by contractor is sort of a misnomer here, because when it comes to subcontractors, if the contractor is going to withhold any funds from them, they must first check in with their government rep. The reason why is because it says that the funds are going to be deducted by the contractor, but it's really the government. The contractor is not authorized to hold any funding. That is the responsibility of the government. So if the contractor is entering a deduction here that was not approved by the government, then this payment will need to be returned for corrections. However, if it was approved, then the deduction will be deducted from the total amount the contractor is requesting to be paid. Within this section, you can see the previous amounts paid by each CLIN and the total allowed to date column, which is going to be the sum of the previous amounts plus the requested this period amounts by CLIN. If you allow additional earnings outside of the pay activities, then this is where the earnings will show in the additional earnings tab. Check with your district policy about using this option for your contract. Something to note here, as I mentioned previously, is the calculation method selection down here at the bottom. Most contracts use the standard calculation, which works very well as long as the RMS CLINs are correctly tied to the CFUM's obligation line item. We do have a YouTube tutorial on how to identify RMS CLINs that are not correctly tied to a CFUM's obligation and how to fix that. Instances that might require you to use the periodic calculation are if RMS is putting the amount on the wrong obligations because the RMS CLINs could possibly be tied incorrectly to its corresponding CFUM's obligation line item in a RMS modification. So if the obligations do not distribute correctly on the obligations tab and you can't correct the obligation/CLIN ties, then the periodic calculation may be a viable option for fixing that. Again, please reference your district's policy. Clicking on the drop-down button for that selection is going to open the screen, which will give you the full definition of what selecting each of these types of calculations is going to do, so you can decide which one works best for your contract or your payment. The last step in this tab is going to be to check the total allowed earnings for this pay period entered checkbox, and this is going to allow you to enter the obligations tab. If you try to look at this tab prior to checking that box in the additional earnings tab, you're going to be prompted to go back and complete that action before you can enter this. So here is where you verify all the money is going to the correct obligation line items. You'll also be allowed to make any deductions or retainages or refunds for this invoice in this section. Any error will present itself here in this box, and once you've completed everything on this section, you can check the ENG 93 completed checkbox. Once that box is checked, the ENG 93 will be created and RMS will automatically move the user to the document package tab where the send payment to CFUMs button is now located. So some common errors that happen in this section: payments are assigned to the incorrect obligation, which leads to over obligation. This happens most often when modifications are linked incorrectly to CFUM's correlating funding accounts, PRNCs, and obligation line items, which we will discuss in this presentation. Another common error is not selecting the ENG 93 complete button. That does need to be selected in order to activate the send payment to CFUMs button and to generate the ENG 93. If you need help with any invoicing issues, please submit a help desk ticket immediately. Waiting in situations like this could lead to interest payments to the contractor if not paid promptly, or other messy situations. So please be sure to submit a help desk ticket as soon as you experience an issue. Once you've got the completed ENG 93 and RMS opens the document package tab, this send payment to CFUMs button will be activated. Again, selecting that ENG 93 completed checkbox is what's going to activate that, as long as there are no errors or issues. On this tab, you can view both the government and the contractor added documents, and finally send the payment to CFUMs using that button. The first step on this page is reviewing the document packages. So to do that, you can just double click on a package to open it for review. If everything has been verified and is acceptable, you can sign the documents by selecting the Sign Selected Documents button and following that signature process. To determine what must be signed and what is just a document of record, you'll need to refer to your district's policy for that. And then when you finish that, you can follow the prompt to finish the signing. Within the ENG 93, there are 2 signature locations. Make sure that you are selecting the correct location. Otherwise, it's going to print a signature on top of the signature, and that won't look very good on the report, and it will be confusing. So please note that the government document package does have an extra file entitled Payment Calculations. This summarizes how RMS calculates the obligation distributions for an invoice. This file is generated every time the allowed activity earnings complete checkbox is checked when using the standard calculation method. This document can be used to help determine if RMS CLINs were incorrectly tied to CFM's obligations. Please review our YouTube tutorial on correcting CLINs linked to incorrectly in a modification for details. Link to that video can be found at the end of this presentation on the references slide. If not, we'll make sure to update that. After you've verified all documents and signatures are present, the last step is going to be to click on the Complete Package button for the contractor document package. When you review it and want to complete that, that button will say Accept Package instead of Complete Package. Either of those buttons are going to send all the documents in the corresponding document package to PCF. Then we can go back to the previous screen where we can verify that the ENG 93 is signed and move into the final step. As the government rep, you'll need to review not only the government document package and complete it, but also ensure that you go into the contractor package for the invoice, review that, and accept it through those previous steps we just reviewed. Now that everything is signed, we can click on the Send Payment to CFMs button. This will send the payment to CFMs immediately after the button is pressed. If this button is not pressed, it will not be sent to CFMs. After clicking on this button, you're going to receive a prompt to authenticate the individual pressing that button. If you want to find out any information as it pertains to the CFMs payment being uploaded to CFMs, just select that Logs widget at the top of the screen. Please note that the individual sending the payment to CFMs must have a valid CFMs user ID for that CFMs district, and their RMS ID must match that CFMS ID. If not, the payment will not be sent, and users won't be notified that the user does not, or the user will be notified that this user does not exist in CFMS. Okay, and like I mentioned earlier, the Reports button in the top right corner of the invoice screen, those are going to allow you to preview any of the reports at any time. The data populated here depends on the stage of the processing of the invoice. The check option is only going to display data once CFMS has sent a check to the contractor. Another thing to be aware of is the possibility that CFMS rejected the payment. If you believe a payment should have been made and it doesn't show a CFMS approved date, go ahead and open the invoice and look for the CFMS error widget, which will show up here. That button is going to show in the top right, just to the left of the Logs button. So it will show about right here. And it's going to be called CFMS error, so just click on that to view the CFMS error message. Moving on from progress payments, and we'll now start to explore the contract changes area in RMS. So a contract change or change request is generated in the anticipation of a potential or real modification to the contract. This is going to generate what is known as a basic change document, or a BCD. So here's a sample view of that basic change document, or BCD. It's going to describe the change, the reason it's necessary, and the initial estimated cost and time impact. to the contract. It can also be used to evaluate AE liability if design errors or omissions caused the change being proposed. So when you initially enter into this module, a selection view for all of the existing change requests is going to be presented, and at the bottom, a summary is going to be provided for whichever change request is selected. So to add a change request, you can click on the Add button and select the type of change request you want to create. You can create a single part change request, so that's pretty straightforward, just a one-part change request. Or you can create parts of a multi-part change request. The change request number is not going to be editable after it has been added. And you can also add a new change request for weather modification. So here we're showing what the screens will look like for each of the different options. Right here we have a single part change request with just the change request number and the reason code selection. For a subsequent part of a multi-part change request, this screen will be shown. You'll be able to select the multi-part change request you want to add on to, and again, the reason code. And here's what the screen will look like for adding a change request for a weather modification. You'll just need to enter in those dates from and through. Okay, here are the mod reason codes available in RMS. So when using these mod reason codes that are controllable or uncontrollable, if there is a time impact on the change request, which is then executed as mod, RMS will not change how the original contract required completion date is calculated in the milestone schedule module. It will continue to calculate the original contract required completion date after adding the award duration to the NTP acknowledged actual date. The time impact associated with the change request when executed will be added to the current duration and will be shown as time growth on the project when viewing or printing reports. When using the mod reason code number 5 and RMS will change how the original contract required completion date is calculated in the milestone schedule module. What that means is the award duration showing in the milestone schedule module will not have time added to it, but the original calculated contract required completion date will reflect the time added in the mod. This is important to understand to ensure that the time added via an award option or incremental definitization of work mod reason code, so that's going to be 5 or I. To make sure the mod is not mistakenly entered into RMS twice. So additionally, when executing a modification that starts from a change request with one of these mod reason codes, the contract will reflect any time growth on reports related to this contract as the time being added is, as the time is being added to the base award duration by using this mod reason code. The first tab you're going to see when initiating a change request is going to be the invoice tab, or excuse me, the inception tab. In this tab, the title and date information for the change is entered. You can also edit the codes associated with the change here if needed. And add, in the lower portion of the screen, there are fields to record which users performed which actions on the change. If you're working on a subsequent part of a multi-part change request, then a checkbox is going to be available to determine this part of the change request as the last part of the multi-part change request. So that checkbox is right here. Is this the final part of a multi-part change? If you've selected to create a multi-part change request, and you're working on the first and only part of that change request, an option will also be available to convert the change to a single part change request. Also down here at the bottom, if you would like to convert part 1 of a multi-part change request to a single part change request, you can click that button. Okay, next in the description tab, so when adding an item here, the change item number will automatically be generated by RMS, but it can be edited by the user if needed within the BCD item edit screen. The screen is also used to fill in the change item title. This field can be used to add a title for the BCD item. You can also select a specification paragraph number to specify which specification paragraph number this BCD should be associated with. You can also do the same with a contract drawing number and enter that number into the field to specify which contract drawing number or numbers within with which this BCD item is associated. The initial estimate field can be used to enter the initial estimate for the BCD item. Please note this field will be disabled if the BCD item is a quantity variation, which we'll review in the next slide. A detailed description of the change should be carefully entered in the description of change field. This is going to be used in supporting documents such as the RFP, the PNM, and of course the BCD. The description of change should be reviewed, and if necessary, it should be changed to reflect the actual scope of work following the final negotiations. Changes in drawings / specifications. If actual changes are being made to the contract documents and additional explanation or verbiage is desired, these optional fields can be used. And finally, the necessity for change. This field is primarily used for the BCD and is not usually provided to the contractor. If you are modifying a quantity CLIN with the change, the changes includes adjustments to quantities on existing CLINs. Checkbox needs to be checked on the description tab before adding an item. This is going to allow the BCD item edit view to respond accordingly, as shown here. Instead of adding an initial estimate, as shown right here in this field, you'll have to click on this quantity variation button, and this will bring up a CLIN selection view for you to make the adjustments to whichever quantity CLIN is being changed. You'll enter the change in the change in quantity field for whichever CLIN is being changed, and the revised quantity column is going to reflect the updated quantity amount for the CLIN to include all the past changes. So if you'll notice, these columns further to the left of the changes in quantity column, those are going to basically summarize whatever amounts have acclimated to the change happening now. If there have been changes previously, those amounts are going to be added here. Next, this is a newer addition, as I mentioned previously in the recap. This is the potential design deficiency tab. Previously, there wasn't any place in RMS for these sections to be edited on the BCD. So to fix that, we've added this tab. If a contract change modification is due to an AE liability, then that information is entered here, and it will be displayed, as I mentioned, on the BCD report. If you need any more information on filling this out, check out the FAR clause referenced, as I mentioned previously, in this screen. And here's a view of how it will look within the BCD. Again, if no is selected on any of these memo boxes, none of these text boxes are going to display. The AE firm is responsible for the quality of its products and services and is liable for damages to the government caused by its negligence or breach of contractual duty. Typical examples of AE liability are when, due to an AE design error or deficiency, modification of an ongoing construction contract is required and there is design-related failure after construction. An AE firm also may be liable for government damages arising from failure to design within the funding limitations or to comply with the contract schedule or technical provisions. In all these instances, FAR Clause 36.608 directs KO to consider the extent to which the architect, engineer, or AE contractor may be reasonably liable and to enforce the liability and collect the amount due if the recoverable cost will exceed the administrative cost involved or is otherwise in the government's interest. Okay, and next is the status funding tab. So choose all of the checkboxes required for this change. A BCD is usually required, I would say, if not always. Is approval, plans, specs, government estimate, proposal, or negotiations required. If none of these are required, just unselect these checkboxes. If they are, make sure you're adding the dates in here. If using proposal or negotiation required options, you must choose which amount was decided as the final change amount and note that with the drop-down box here. Add the money to the funding account in the bottom here. Any problems here will first show in the modification, and then if ignored, they will populate in the next and future progress payments. So please make sure that you're filling out all of this information as accurately as possible. And finally, once all of this information has been set, you can set the change request and fund status appropriately. If a BCD has already been created for this change, as I mentioned in the recap, then this button is going to reflect that by displaying whichever BCD version is being created.
Okay, for the change request demo, we'll go ahead and pull up our contract. From the contract menu, we'll go to the Finances tab, and then to the Contract Changes module to add a change request. Before I start on this change, it is important to note that a good awareness of the contract's finances or references nearby you to guide the information you're going to put in is going to be very beneficial during this process. As we mentioned earlier, the Finances tab is not a place where mistakes and or errors can be taken lightly. Any of those are going to have most likely will have pretty significant impacts on the contract. Also, there should be a general idea of what exactly is changing, if something is being added, if something is being updated, and so on. A good method to use is to have another instance of RMS up for reference so that the information in the finances areas that you're referencing can be viewed concurrently with the change requests that you're working on. And that'll allow all the information that you're entering to be verified. When adding change requests, it's also beneficial to have permissions that allow access to contract finances. So as I just mentioned, everything can be verified. Everything in the contract finances is listed all together. And there are, of course, other ways around this, like by having access to the current CLINs module, which will work as well. So I do also have an Excel sheet pulled up for my reference, which shows the information that I'm already aware of for the changes. So I know which obligation is going to be changed, which PRNC and line item that is associated with, which funding account it's going to be associated with, and whether the CLIN that is being added or updated is new or needs to be added. And then finally, the CLIN type. So to add a change request, Within the change request selection view, we'll click on the Add button. And for the sake of this demo, I'm going to add the first part of a multi-part change request so that I can show one of the newer options available for that. We'll leave our change request number as the automatically generated number. And to select our reason code, we'll select in the blue box to pull up the lookup for the modification reason codes. As we mentioned earlier, as part of the slides, there are 3 types of these codes. I want to specifically touch on the codes 5 and I. That's going to be contract options and the incremental definitization of work codes. If either of these 2 codes are selected, a time change is going to be required as part of the change. So when using these reason codes, RMS is going to change how the original contract required completion date is calculated in the milestone schedule module. What that means is the award duration showing in the milestone schedule module will not have time added to it, but the originally calculated contract required completion date will reflect the time added in the mod. In this case, it will now calculate the original contract required completion date by adding the award duration plus the NTP acknowledged actual date plus the contract option or incremental definitization of work mod durations. This is important to understand to ensure that time added via either of these mod reason codes is not mistakenly entered into RMS twice. Additionally, when executing a modification that starts from a change request with a mod reason code of either 5 or I, the contract will not reflect any time growth on reports related to this contract, as the time is being added to the base award duration by using this mod reason code. Now, for the sake of this demo, I'll just go ahead and make an arbitrary selection and click OK. And finally, we'll click Finish. That is going to bring us to the change request edit view with all of these different tabs up here, starting at the Inception tab. Here, the title for the change request can be entered, and there are a lot of dates for different purposes that can also be entered. Fill out this section as the district policy requires, but an inception date for RMS will be required. Also, if you're canceling a change, this date canceled date will also be required. Down here is where you can fill in the staff titles for who performed what. I'll go ahead and add some here. If needed, the codes over here can be changed as well from the previous selections made. In the mod type code, this is going to allow you to change the modification type. If you'll notice these checkboxes here, if you change, if you update the modification types to a modification type with these checkboxes checked, it is going to require a contractor signature. Next, we'll go to the description tab. This is where you're going to enter the description items for the change. We will be adding 2 BCD items on this change request. You can add as many BCDs as needed here. I want to start off with the quantity CLIN that we're updating here. So whenever you're adding a change request description item for a quantity CLIN, for an adjustment to a quantity CLIN that already exists, you'll check on this checkbox. And this screen will automatically be set up for a quantity variation. On a normal amount edit view, which we will show, the dollar amount can be adjusted, but in this screen for a quantity change, this button right here, quantity variation, needs to be used. So we'll click that. That button is going to bring you to this grid where you can add the change in quantity. Now, if there was already a change made to the quantity CLIN previously, then the previous amount columns is going to show the previous amount and previous quantity columns are going to show those values. The revised quantity is going to show the final value, which adds the previous values with the current value, and that's what's going to show in the revised quantity column. So the one we'll be making a change to is going to be 001 according to our spreadsheet over here. And we've got the change amount at $1,000. The unit price is $100 for this, so we'll go ahead and enter 10. Make sure our amounts match up to our change amount and go back. And we'll see that the initial estimate field also updates with that amount that was calculated from the update in quantity that we just entered. So now I'll go back and I'm going to add just one more item. I'll accept that change request number. And so here is going to be the amount edit view. So here you'll just update the initial estimate instead of the quantity as for the last one. I did not add my title to the last one, so I'll add that here now. And so my other two ones are going to be normal CLINs. So I'll add those two together. That's going to make 1,150. Click out of there. And that's complete for our changes. Okay, now once all of our BCD items have been added, before moving to the status funding tab, we'll check on the claims and disputes tab. If you have any contractor claims or disputes within the contract, those will be listed here and you can select a claim, make edits due to the change as needed. We also have the potential design deficiency tab. This tab is for entering information if the change is due to an AE liability or an architect engineer liability. The architect engineer contractor may be liable to correct or revise any errors or omissions in its design and may be liable for damages to the government. So if that's the case, you will fill in that information here. There are 3 prompts. It will default to the radio buttons on no, which will have no text boxes. However, if you select yes here, it will bring up a text box that you can enter text into. You can also select this notebook icon to pop out the window for the field. So the first one is this change the result of the AE firm making an error or omission? If yes, you'll add that description here. The second prompt is, does the error or omission appear to be negligence or breach of contractual duty? If yes, enter that description of the negligence here. And the third and final prompt is, has the government suffered damages as a result of the AE's action? If yes, enter the description of damages, and then also as part of this prompt, you can enter in the cost information as it relates to those damages. For the sake of this demo, I'll leave these all as no. And then we can navigate to the status funding tab. The top section in this tab, the change request status section, is going to contain some prompts for the status of the change that can be set as required. So these dates are entered as the life cycle of the change progresses and as as the contract policy or district policy requires. You can check all of the boxes here that apply. If these boxes are checked, make sure that you are entering these dates for the check boxes. Otherwise, if a date is not entered or left empty, the change cannot be considered complete, and therefore it will not be able to get linked to modifications. So for the sake of this demo, I'll go ahead and unselect all of these. And I'll set a BCD required completion date. Now below that is the change request funding section. This is where the funding accounts are associated to the change. So this is where it is very important to have a pretty good understanding of the contract's finances. If the correct funding account isn't used, then that's going to cause issues in the modifications and then in the progress payments within the contract. So be very cautious and make sure that the values added here are accurate and input into the correct funding accounts. This is also where having more than one instance of RMS can be helpful. If you're not sure which funding accounts need to be used, you can look in other places in RMS in a different instance to get that information. So right now, let's say I just didn't have this funding account number for the quantity CLIN we're updating. So I'll go ahead and delete that. And I'll pull up the same contract in another instance. So here I'm in the same contract as my change. And if I go to the Finances tab, and then to the Current CLINs tab. So we know that this quantity CLIN that we're updating is 0001. So I'll go ahead and select that CLIN. And when I select that CLIN, I can see all the information for the CLIN, including the funding account number. So I'll minimize that. And we know that $1,000 is put on there. So we'll find our funding account from here. 1073 is the correct one, I think. Yes, 1073. So then I'll enter $1,000 for that funding account. And for my other two CLINs, I know that one of them is going to be a new one and the other one is going to be editing that CLIN. Since I don't have any CLIN material to look at for this one, we do know that both of them are going to be funded by this funding account. So I'll go ahead and enter that combined amount into the correct funding account. And so by using both our spreadsheet and another instance of RMS, we were able to enter the change amount for the correct funding account here. After that's been completed, you can change the change request status to approved. Optionally, you can add the funds status. I'll go ahead and make a selection. Those are the selections available. And finally, you can click on this Create BCD button, and that's going to create the BCD for this change request and add it to the Supporting Documents tab. So we'll go over to that tab. We do see that there's a completed BCD over here, and I want to mention that whenever you're creating an additional BCD version, it's going to reflect that same version in the button. Okay, and now this change request is ready to be linked to a modification.
Once the change request has been completed, then completing a contract modification is the next logical step in completing the change to the contract. So a modification allows the government to add or change information and or requirements of the contract. As with change requests, logical steps can be followed and tracked until the modification is completed. Okay, so for modifications, the change request must be completed before a modification can be generated and linked to the change request. Use the latest contracting division modification numbering system for the numbering. Modifications signed by an ACO will have mods in the format A0000, and those signed by the contracting officer or procurement officer will have mods in the format P0000, and then the number, and then the final number. The export button is going to generate a report of all of the modifications in either PDF or Excel format, and will include the change request number, the title, status, reference number, change amount, change days, and mod age. This report could be used for requesting additional funds from the PM. Modifications also must be entered in both SPS and RMS, and a hard copy of the SPS SF30 and CAR, or Contractor Action Report, must be uploaded in the RMS Modifications module within the Mod Package tab. Okay, so when adding or initiating a modification, the SF30-1 tab is going to be the first screen presented. As you notice, these first few tabs are going to coordinate with the SF30 report. So any information entered in these tabs will be added to the SF30. In this first SF30-1 tab, this is where the change request already created and completed can be linked to the modification. The funding for the change request is also added within this tab. Please note that if the change includes a change to existing quantity CLINs, then the funding will be added automatically upon linking that change request. Finally, for this tab, the funding needs to be added in the funding for this modification section. Please make sure that you are choosing the correct funding account for this section. If you don't, this will cause errors in other places like progress payments. Next is the SF30-2 tab. This is where a lot of text information for the SF30 can be added as required. One thing I do want to point out is the modification number field. This field must match the number that is signed by PD squared. So if it does not match, then this will cause an error in PCF when attempting to upload the documents. The next requisition number will usually be populated automatically by RMS. The information for block 13 on the SF30 is also located here. You select the way the mod is being issued and select the applicable FAR clause. This area is also where you can indicate if a contractor's signature is required or not. And lastly, the modification title field. If you're selecting more than one change request on a modification, please make sure that the modification title reflects the basic scope of work for each item. All right, block 14 is continued in this tab for recording further information for the contract price and time, along with the change in schedule and closing statement information. Then it continues into block 15A and block 16A, which are used for recording signature information for the contractor and the contracting officer, or the administrative contracting officer. Standard text may be available to use in these fields. So to access the standard text module, users are going to need to have the district admin right for standard text under the district library section checked. When you click on one of these notebook icons, the standard text button will be available in that window, and you can click on that to search for a standard text that's available for insertion into these fields. So after recording information in the SF30 tabs, you'll come to the Release Mod tab. This is where the mod is marked as completed and the obligations for payment are set for the CLIN changes. So you'll check the modification funded with PRNC and CFUMS checkbox to get the modification signature section to show. If needed, check this contractor signature required checkbox and to show the dates that relate to the contractor as shown here. The sent contractor date is the date the SF30 is sent to the contractor. The government signature date is the date the ACO signs the SF30. Obligation approval in CFUMS is done after the ACO signs the modification. And you can double click on these CLINs here to add the obligation line item. So when doing that, if you're modifying a sub-CLIN, the obligation selection for that will not be available. And this is due to the fact that sub-CLINs can only be funded by a single obligation line item. When you double click on a CLIN to assign the obligations for payment, click on the funding button to enter the amounts in the obligation for the CLIN. Make sure there are no variances in the details here at the bottom. If you don't see the obligation line item that you need within this screen, then either the PRNC line number chosen on the SF30-1 tab was incorrect, or the funding account chosen in the change request was incorrect. So this is going to need to be fixed, or it will result in other errors, as I mentioned previously, in other financial areas within RMS. After clicking Next, after adding the amount to the obligation, you can review the changes. If something's still not right, you can make the updates as needed. And finally, you can click the Finish button to finish that, and then click the Back button to leave the funding and return to the modification. So then we can check the modification funded with obligations and CFUMS checkbox. When the modification is complete, you can check on the modification completed - include this modification in current contract checkbox. This pop-up is going to appear regarding the balance of activities. Balancing the activities is usually the responsibility of the contractor. So if the government performs this instead, they need to make sure to communicate that with contractors so that all the updates are aligned on both sides. If you are going to balance the pay activities for the contractor, then double-clicking on the CLIN here will bring up a list of all the activities associated with the CLIN. You can choose the appropriate activity to open, or you can add a new one. All of this can be done from this Pay Activities area in the change in RMS. Once the new CLIN and pay activity have been added by the government due to a modification, the contractor adds the remaining pay activity data fields. Please note, this should be done before the contractor requests the next pay request. And this is going to prevent any negative values with future invoices. This is completed by the contractor loading the new CLIN and pay activity into their scheduling software, changing the schedule to the SDEV format or the XML format now, and uploading into RMS. If the pay activities amount do not exceed the new CLIN amount, the contractor can use the pay activity the government assigns, or they can produce another pay activity or several pay activities. So one of the final steps in completing a modification is going to be to complete the mod package. The document package here is available for storing electronic mod documents. If the mod package is going to be processed outside of RMS, you can specify that by checking the mod package will be completed and loaded into PCF from outside RMS checkbox, and then no action will be needed with the document package. There are 3 documents that must be uploaded into the mod package. That's going to be the scope of work, the contract action report, and the modification SF30. So that's going to be, oh, excuse me. Yes, correct. So that's going to be option A, J, and K. You cannot complete the mod package without adding these documents first. So once everything's been added, the document package can be completed by clicking on the Complete Package button. And then you can click on the Mod Package Complete - Send to District/PCF checkbox in the Mod Package tab view shown here. That will be the final step in completing the mod. So once you've completed a mod, this is the goal here. There should be a green check mark on each item listed in the modification status section at the bottom of the modification selection view.
So since we have a completed change request from our last demo, we can go ahead and enter our contract to add a modification. So here I'm in the same contract. I'll go to the Finances tab and then to the Contract Modifications module. To add a modification, we'll click on the Add button. I'll leave the reference number as is. And initially we'll be brought to the SF30-1 tab. So the first thing we need to do is add our change request that we just completed into the change request included in this modification section. So to do that, we'll click on the Add button. And we can already see that our change request is available here, and it is in fact ready for a modification. If you are linking a change request and you notice that this checkbox is unchecked for a change request that you're trying to link, something has not been completed in that change request. Maybe the inception date is missing or one of the dates from the status funding tab is missing. But you'll just need to go back into there, get it completely ready for the mod, and this checkbox will be checked and it'll be able to get linked to the modification. So I'll go ahead and select that change request that we just created and click on OK. You'll then be brought to a window where you'll be asked if you would like to copy any supporting documents from the change request into the mod package. So just to show what it looks like, I'll click yes. I'm not going to actually add any, but if there were multiple documents here, you can make your selection on which ones you'd like to include. And if you'd like to include all of them, if there are multiple ones available, this top checkbox can be checked to select everything or even to deselect everything. So I'm not going to add that. I'd like to point something out later, so we'll get to that. Okay, now that the change request has been added, we can see that there's already a CLIN populated here in the contract line items changed by this modification section. This is only going to happen for quantity CLINs. If the change does not change or create a new quantity CLIN, then this will not occur. Since it's a quantity CLIN and it was already selected as part of the change, that's going to be populated into this section automatically. Now we're going to add 2 more CLINs to this section to add the remaining funding from the change. And we're going to add 2 more so that we can look at updating both an existing amount sub-CLIN and adding a new quantity CLIN. So first, we'll select to update an existing CLIN from this Add button to the left here. So we'll click on Revise Existing CLIN. Let me get my sheet pulled back up. So the existing CLIN that we're editing is going to be 0002 AA. So it is also a sub-CLIN. So we'll go ahead and make that selection and select OK. Okay, so we know from our spreadsheet that the change amount for this CLIN is going to be $1,000. And so in the amount column, or in the amount field under the change amount section, we'll go ahead and enter that value and click on back to return back to the modification. Next, we'll choose to manually add a new CLIN. So we'll select the manually add CLIN option from the add selection. We'll leave it as a new priced parent CLIN and select next. And I'm going to make this CLIN a quantity CLIN. So we'll go ahead and choose a quantity. And click Finish. Now back in our spreadsheet, we need to look at the change amount for the new CLIN. And it is a quantity CLIN as well. And we'll see that it is $150. I'll go ahead and name the CLIN real quick. And our unit price, we'll go ahead and just leave it at $100. And so for our quantity to get up to $150, we'll do 1.5. And we have our amount from that new change, that new CLIN entered. So we'll go back, navigate back to the SF30-1 tab. And the next thing we need to do is to look at the funding for this modification. This is another area where you can verify that the funding was set up correctly in the change and is allowing the correct funding setup within the modification as well. In this section, you can verify that the correct PRNC line number and numbers are being used for the funding. So we'll double click on this 1073 funding account that we selected earlier, and we need to enter the funding into the correct line item number. So we'll pull up our information spreadsheet again. Okay, so for the change that's being funded by funding account 1073, we're going to need to put that amount on line 1. So for line 1, we'll double click in this area and select enter our value. Make sure that there is no variance, and that has been successful. We'll go back again and select on our other funding account, which still seems to be correct again. So for our new quantity CLIN that was added, that's going to be using line 6. So we'll select line 6 and enter our value. And since this is a combined funding amount, we are also using this one down here, the sub-CLIN, and that's going to be line 2. Make sure there's no variance and go back. And it looks like the modification funding is complete for the SF30-1 tab. Okay, once we've completed the SF30-1 tab, we'll go to the SF30-2 tab. So 2 important things get accomplished in this screen. First, it's going to be this modification number field. This modification number should come directly from PD squared, and that number will need to be entered here exactly as it appears in that program. Otherwise, you're going to encounter issues with the mod package loading to PCF properly. So make sure that these numbers match before completing the mod package. Usually it's A000 and then the modification number, but that should be verified before confirming. If a mod package is created first in the SF30-1 tab by copying the supporting documents from the change request, then the modification number entered here is not going to appear on the document package title. If the mod package is completed, everything will be fine and the documents will go to the correct PCF container. But if you'd like to make sure that the mod package also contains this number, make sure to enter it here first before the mod package is created, and it will display on the mod package document package title. If you, again, it's no problem if you copy the supporting documents from the change request in the SF30-1 tab. It just will not contain the modification number in the mod package title. As long as the modification number matches exactly what is in PD squared, there should be no issue getting the mod package to PCF. So I'll use that format I mentioned earlier and match our change request number. The next goal on this tab is in block 13A, important. This is where the contractor signature required checkbox is going to be checked automatically. However, it can be unchecked if the modification type allows for that. So I'll pull up the SF30 to show that real quick. So in the SF30, block 14E, right here, it says contractor is not or is required to sign this document and return original and 2 copies to the issuing office. So if the checkbox is unchecked, this is not checkbox is going to be checked. And then if it is checked, the is checkbox is going to be checked. So just make sure that this is accurately displaying whether or not the contractor signature is required. Real quick, I'll go back and check. In our change request, I did not update the mod type code, so that is a bilateral change, and it does require the contractor signature. So for the sake of this demo, I will just act as the contractor whenever it gets to the signature fields for that. The rest of this information, both SF30 block 12 and SF30 block 13 and 14, are just filled out based on district and office policy. So next on the SF30-3 tab, again, these are going to be filled out based on district and office policies, the change in contract price, additional optional notes, the optional additional notes for change in contract time, schedule change notes, and the SF30 closing statement. If you want to click on these notebook icons, it will pop out a window for the field. And if you have standard text available for any of these fields, you can click here and select that memo text from the standard text for the district. So since contract signature is required, we'll go ahead and add some contract signature information for the mod. And we'll also enter a government signature block here. Make our selection. And once everything has been filled out and verified in these 3 tabs for the SF30, we can move forward into the Release Mod tab. This is where you can check the modification funded by PRNC and CFMS checkbox. Contractor signature is required, so we'll go ahead and fill in these dates. And we'll add a government signature date. Once the government signature date has been entered, the CLIN changes / obligations for payment section will appear. The next step is going to be putting obligations for payment on each CLIN. So right here already we've noticed that the amount sub-CLIN that we're updating already has this obligation amount entered already. And that's because a subclin can only be funded by a single obligation line item. And so that has already been entered. Next, we'll go into our quantity parent CLIN. To add funding to this, you just click on the funding button. And if you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, whenever you're working on the funding for a modification, it's going to show you a summary of the funding for the modification. Okay, so we're looking at CLIN 0001, and that's this one right here. And the obligation change is going to be 2001. So we'll find that here, and we'll add our amount. Down here, it's showing that we have no variance. So we'll click Next. Verify this is correct. If it needs to be changed, we would click the back button, but it looks correct, so we'll go ahead and click Finish. And back once more. And the last one, we'll double click in the new quantity CLIN. Click on the funding again. Look over at our reference sheet here. That's going to be line 2005, so we'll enter our amount in that line. Again, no variance. Next, and finish. Go back to our modification once more. So we've added the obligations for the CLIN changes, and we've verified that there is no variance, and we've also verified that we've added the amounts to the correct obligation line items. So after that's been completed, we can go ahead and check this modification funded with obligations in CFMS checkbox. And finally, we can click on the modification completed, include this modification in the current contract checkbox. This window is going to come up warning you that the activities will need to be balanced prior to making payment. So we will proceed. And we'll go to the Pay Activities tab. So it should be noted that the government can absolutely go into the Pay Activities tab and balance the activities, but this is not recommended when using an SDEF import. This is because it's the contractor's responsibility to update the activities in the schedule. And if you're using an SDEF import and the government does this for the contractor, when the contractor performs a pay request before the next SDEF import, if they've changed what the pay activities are called, then there will be problems that occur with that. And it's going to result in some negative values. So if the contract is using an SDEF import, do not balance the activities for the contractor. Once the modification complete checkbox has been checked, notify the contractor that the new money has been added. Tell them which CLINs have been added or updated and get them to update their schedule, then re-import with this new information before the next pay request is entered. That way everything is updated before the next pay request and no odd negative numbers will appear for them. Okay, now moving into the mod package tab, this is where you're going to upload electronic documentation for the mod. If you do not plan on doing this within RMS, you plan on loading into PCF from outside of RMS, you can click on this checkbox and that will take care of that for you. You won't need to add any documents. We will be adding documents to the document package. Before I do that, actually, I'm going to go back to the SF30-1 tab, and I'm going to click on this copy supporting documents again. And I am going to copy that BCD over from the change request, and it's going to be found in our mod package now. And then I'll add our other two documents that are required. That's going to be the SF30 from our modification, and also the CIR or the contract action report. So you can add as many documents as you like, and clicking on the Add button, you can choose to add from file system. But these three are going to be the ones that are required. So I'm going to go ahead and set the PCF container. So A for the BCD, or statement of work or scope of work. J for the SF30 modification document, and K for the contract action report. These three documents must be found in the mod package for the modification to be completed. If you need to, go ahead and add your signature information by selecting a document and selecting Sign Selected Documents. You can go ahead and click all of them if you'd like. Go ahead and click Next. If you'd like to select a signature title, click on this button. If you have a signature title if this signature title is something you'd like to use for future signatures, you can just select that checkbox. And if you'd like to change the digital signature position for any of these, you can double click in here, click on the ellipses button, and select the document signature position that you'd like to use. So I'm going to click Finish to sign all of these documents. And now that all the documents have been signed, I'm going to click on Complete Document Package, Complete Package to complete the mod package. So now nothing is editable anymore, and we'll go back to the modification in the Mod Package tab. And finally, we can select the Mod Package Complete, Send to District PCF/PCF checkbox. RMS is also going to log who completed the mod at what time, and so you will need to authenticate upon completing a mod package for a modification. So I'll do that now. And our mod package is ready to be sent to PCF. Again, if the mod number on the SF30-2 tab right here, modification number, if that is not correct, the documents will not be sent to PCF. PCF will reject those documents, and the documents will have to be loaded into PCF manually. So make sure that those numbers match. And that is completing a modification.
Okay, moving on from modifications, we're going to review the contractor claims and disputes module. This is where REAs, or requests for equitable adjustment, and contractor claims are added and tracked. If a field office receives an REA or a claim from the contractor, the field office enters and keeps the data current in this module. An REA, or request for equitable adjustment, is considered collaboration between a government contracting officer and a contractor attempting to resolve an issue and reach an amicable resolution. So to add a claim or dispute, you can click on Add in the selection view. A pop-up form will be displayed asking for some required information, like the ID, which should be auto-generated, the project manager, and the type of claim being added. So a potential claim that could be a problem in the future. REA, that's a request for equitable adjustment, as I mentioned, and this is considered collaboration between a government contracting officer and the contractor attempting to resolve the issue. A COD request, contracting officer's decision. It is the government's initial response to a contractor's claim under the Contract Disputes Act. And an appeal type, when a contractor wishes to reverse a decision for a previous claim or dispute. The contractor claims report can be found in the contract reports module within the finance menu, as shown here. The edit view for a contractor claim or dispute is also how you add the contract claim or dispute to a contract change. So in the bottom portion of the edit view here, you'll see a checkbox labeled Final settlement requires contract modification, check that box to display the option to link this claim or dispute to a contract change or modification. To link it to a change request, you'll need to have an already created change request in the contract changes module. You'll click the button for the change request to bring up a lookup of all of the changes and choose the appropriate change request the claim or dispute should be linked to. The events listed at the bottom are based what is entered in the district library's claim/dispute events module. Okay, and finally, for the claims and disputes, this is a sample view of a contractor claims report. So on to our final topic for today, we're going to be discussing placement. The placement schedule tracks the dollar value completed over time for budget purposes and to ensure proper fiscal management of the contract. Contact your office administrator for more details on how to set up and utilize placement for your district, unless, of course, you are the administrator. For any contract to be able to display or calculate placement, the contract must, at a minimum, have the milestone schedule set up with a scheduled contract award date, a scheduled NTP acknowledgement date, and the estimated or award duration set. Once those have been entered, users may then be able to start working on calculating placement for the contract. So let's look at the options available for calculating and displaying placement. So when you first open this module, at the top you're going to see 3 or 4 tabs. In this image here, there are only 3 tabs. That's because the 4th tab, the actual versus baseline tab, is only going to show if the contract has been added to the baseline for a fiscal year. Since that tab is missing here, this contract has not been added to any fiscal year baselines for this district. You'll also notice there's a graph option in the upper right corner of the view. It's not selectable for this contract, and that's because this option is only available if the contract has been added to the baseline for a fiscal year as well. So we'll be discussing both sections, both of those later. The first tab is the placement curve tab. And this is where users can customize how the placement curve is going to be created. The next tab is the monthly placement tab, which will display any actual earnings plus the projected earnings based on the computed placement options chosen in the placement curve tab. And the third tab is the actual versus projected placement tab. On this tab, users can compare the actual and scheduled earnings with projected earnings. And finally, the actual versus baseline tab. It's going to be the original projected placement and the mid-year projected placement setup. So the first tab in the placement schedule is the placement curve tab, as I mentioned. This is where the users can determine what data to use to create the placement curve. So users can also see when the last placement calculation was made by viewing this little line up here. Under that section is the placement based on section, and this is where you can make selections for the actual placement curve. There are 3 options in this section: manually entering data points, using an S-curve, or using different variations of a contractor schedule. And we'll talk about each of these individually. First up is the placement based on section. The manually entering data points option, or the manually entered projected monthly earnings option. So when using this, users will only be allowed to enter projections for future dates, with any actual earnings being the starting point for the placement curve. If this option is chosen, users are going to need to select the placement start date. This start date can be the award or the NTP scheduled or actual dates from the milestone schedule, or you can manually enter a start date by selecting other by selecting the Select Date button and making the date selection. Then a placement finish date will also need to be set. This can be based on the milestone of construction completion or final payment. And again, if those dates are not the date desired, you can select this Select Date button again and make the appropriate selection. Last, users will need to choose the placement amount. Now, if this is a future contract, users will be able to choose either the estimated contract amount, which was entered in the future contract module, or you can use a manually entered amount. If the contract is active, then the user has 3 options to choose from: the manually entered amount, the current contract amount, and the current contract including pending mods amount. Once those options have been set, you can click on the Compute Placement and then proceed to the Monthly Placement tab. The Monthly Placement tab allows you to update the project monthly placement to be used with the manually entered earnings option on the previous tab. In this view, users can tell which months are future months and which are the past, as designated by the colored box to the right of the column here. Red is going to be future months and green is going to be past months. When manually updating future projections, you can use the right 2 columns and either enter a percentage value in the far right column or the dollar amount in the second to right column. Both entries will update the corresponding column, so if a percentage is entered, when users click or tab out of that, the amount is updated to the correct corresponding dollar amount, and vice versa. If this is a new contract that has never had placement calculations computed, no data is going to display here until the Compute Placement button has been clicked. So users will need to finish making selections on the Placement Curve tab, click the Compute Placement button, and then be able to see dates show on this tab to update the manually entered scheduled placement values. Back on the Placement Curve tab, the next option to base your placement on is on an S-curve from the district library, modified for actuals to date. When this option is selected, users must specify which S-curve to use by clicking on the Select S-curve button, then choosing the appropriate S-curve for the options displayed. This display is going to give the users a generic graph of the selected curve in the bottom of the view, so users will know which curve best fits the contract's needs. This list and curve structure are set up in the District Library's Construction S-curve module, which we'll discuss next. After the S-curve has been chosen, the users will then need to choose the start and finish dates plus the total placement amount, similar to the options chosen for a manually entered earnings option. Here we're showing where the S-curves can be added, deleted, or edited from the district, assuming you have the correct permissions to do so. Again, this is found in the district library. Users can click on the Add button to add a new curve based on a year plan. For each month of that year, you'll need to define the percentage expected for this curve type, with the 12th month hitting 100%. To access this module, users will need to have the district admin rights for construction S-curves under the district library options checked. The last option for the placement based on section is the contractor's activity scheduled start and finish dates. When this option is selected, 3 more options are displayed. The early, mid-float, and late options correspond to the two contracts with activity schedules imported through an SDEP, or most recently an XML file after today's release, I should specify. So therefore, it's important to ensure that the first SDEP or schedule has been imported and does include scheduled dates prior to using this option. You will also need to ensure that the schedule is complete prior to using this option to calculate placement. When choosing any of these options, users will not need to choose the start, end, or finish date. Those will come from the activity schedule, so you won't need to make any selections there. Within the start and finish section, you will see dates used for the calculations in the dark gray labels in those sections shown here. If an activity schedule does not have a value for the chosen contractor schedule, then the label is going to state that there are no dates for early, late, or mid-float date, depending on which option you chose. If the activity schedule is missing either an early or late start or finish date, the mid-float option will not work either, as not mid-float dates can be calculated. Cannot be calculated. Therefore, before computing placement, ensure that the dark gray label for the start and finish date in these sections displays an actual date to get the curve to be calculated. And then finally, you can click on the Compute Placement button to compute placement for the option selected. So regardless of which options users use on the Placement Curve tab, the Monthly Placement tab will display the corresponding amount used to create the curve displayed on the bottom of the Placement Curve tab. Generally, editing the two columns is only needed with the manual option. However, there are times where anomalies occur that require slight adjustments to these calculations. Any adjustments can be made here on future months only. If adjustments are made here, to update your placement curve, click on the Compute Placement button on the bottom right of this view after you've made the adjustments. Okay, the final tab for placement schedule on all contracts is the Actual versus Projected Placement tab. This view will only allow you to compute the actual and scheduled placement versus the projected placement. The difference between the scheduled placement and the projected placement depends on the stage of the contract. So at award, the projected placement equals the actual and scheduled placement. But after award, the projected placement is used to show delays in placement. Okay, now for the final tab, which only shows up in certain cases, or in one certain case. It's only going to be available for contracts that have been added to a fiscal year baseline for the district, and that's what's going to make this tab show up. This tab allows RMS to track placement as the contract progresses and provides a comparison to the fiscal year projected placement of that year that this contract is associated with. When viewing the graph button from in the upper right corner, right here, you're going to see a graphical representation of this data grid. Actual placement values will be in the green bars, and projected placement will be in the red bars, while the baseline data is going to show in the yellow bars. We don't have the image of that graph, but we'll make sure and add it in somewhere. Please note that again, the red and green colors of the Please note that the red and green colors of this graph do not correlate with the future and past months, as I mentioned previously. Only the projected and actual earnings for the months listed respectively. Okay, so if a contract needs to be added to the baseline for a fiscal year, that can be done by a district admin in the district office, the FY baseline placement module. If you have the correct permissions, you can navigate to the district office tab for the district, open this module, And in this module, you're going to see a list of all the fiscal years that have been added to the district with the status and the projected amounts of each fiscal year. To add a contract to the fiscal year baseline, the contract cannot be in a training or local office type. As long as the contract is set to any other office type, you can find the contract to add by double-clicking on the fiscal year that you wish to add the contract to. Once in the fiscal year placement edit view, you can set if a baseline is unlocked or not. If a baseline is unlocked, then contracts can still be added to that fiscal year's baseline, and the due date can be added for when the baseline must be finalized. Once the baseline is locked, no more contracts can be added to the baseline for that fiscal year. To add a contract to an unlocked baseline, search for the contract in the contract list and double click on it. This will bring up the contracts placement schedule module with a new actual versus baseline tab where users can enter the monthly baseline for that contract, then copy that placement to the FY baseline. And I think that was our last slide of the presentation. Here we have some references available, some YouTube videos we found may be helpful. I think we can actually add some more here, so we'll get these slides updated with those. We've also got the RMS website, YouTube, service desk, and help desk phone number available here, along with the KM portal link. And now we'll open the floor up for any questions that any of you may have. Feel free to unmute or just add your question to the Q&A section of the WebEx. Okay, I don't hear anyone unmuting, and our Q&A is empty. So last call for questions before we get out of here. Thank you all for attending. If you think of a question later, feel free to submit a help desk ticket to us and we'll get that taken care of. And also, please look out for the video recording of this training session, which will be posted to our YouTube channel within about 5 business days. Thank you, everybody. We're going to close out now. Everybody have a great day.